You're not real. I mean the you that woke up this morning, checked your phone, worried about your problems, defended your opinions. That version of you is a ghost, a fabrication, and somewhere in the back of your mind, behind all the noise and the performance, you've always known this. You felt it in those quiet moments when you're alone and the mask slips off. When you look in the mirror and wonder who's actually looking back. The truth is, your entire sense of self, this precious ego you've been protecting your whole life, is nothing more than a pattern of conditioned responses, a collection of memories arranged into a story you've mistaken for reality. And what makes this truly unbearable isn't just that mystics have been saying this for centuries. It's that quantum physics, the hardest of hard sciences, is now confirming what an Islamic mystic named Ibn Arabi understood 800 years ago. There is no separate self. There is only one reality expressing itself through infinite masks, and your ego is the biggest lie you've ever believed. This isn't philosophy. This isn't religion. This is what happens when you stop lying to yourself about what you actually are. And if you can make it through this video, you'll never experience yourself the same way again. Because once you understand what quantum mechanics reveals about the nature of observation and what Ibn Arabi understood about the unity of being, you'll realize that everything you've defended, every argument you've won, every identity you've built, all of it has been a desperate attempt to avoid the most terrifying truth in existence. You were never separate from anything to begin with. Let's start with something that should disturb you more than it probably does. Every morning you wake up and immediately reconstitute your ego. You remember your name, your problems, your preferences, your grudges. You scroll through your phone and reinforce your opinions, your tribal affiliations, your curated version of who you're supposed to be. And you call this continuity. You call this being yourself. But here's what's actually happening. You're not experiencing reality. You're experiencing a conditioned response to reality, filtered through layers of past experiences, cultural programming, and psychological defense mechanisms. The self you think you are is nothing more than the brain's memory system, creating an illusion of continuity from discontinuous quantum events. When quantum physicists first encountered what they called the observer effect, they discovered something that violated every assumption about objective reality. In the famous double-slit experiment, particles behave like waves when unobserved, existing in a state of superposition, occupying multiple possibilities simultaneously, but the moment observation occurs, the wave function collapses into a single definite state. For decades, scientists debated whether consciousness itself was required for this collapse, whether the act of observation by a conscious mind was somehow fundamental to reality itself. And while mainstream physics has tried to explain this away through decoherence and measurement theory, the philosophical implications remain inescapable. Reality at the quantum level exists as pure possibility until observation crystallizes it into actuality. Now here's where your ego starts to panic. Because if reality exists as probability waves until observation collapses them, then what you call the world isn't a fixed stage on which your separate self performs. It's a participatory phenomenon. You're not a subject observing an objective world. You're part of the observation process itself, inseparable from what you're observing. The boundary you've drawn between in here and out there, between observer and observed, is an artificial construction. And this construction, this sense of being a separate witness to reality, is precisely what we call the ego. The ego is the pattern of conditioning that makes you feel like an isolated subject in a world of objects. It's the accumulation of every repeated response to stimuli, every memory that gets encoded and then referenced the next time something similar occurs. The first time you encounter something, a waterfall, a piece of music, a moment of beauty, you experience it from what we might call the quantum self, unitive, immediate, unconditioned by past associations. You feel connected to everything, but the second time you encounter it, your brain references the first experience. The third time, it references both previous experiences. Layer by layer, experience by experience, you build up a conditioned response system. And this system, this collection of patterns and memories and learned behaviors, gradually crystallizes into what you mistake for your true self. But it's not your true self. It's a functional construct. And quantum mechanics reveals this in a way that's almost cruel in its clarity. Because at the quantum level, before conditioning occurs, before memory creates the illusion of continuity, there is no separate experiencer. There's simply consciousness collapsing possibilities into actualities. The you that seems to be doing the experiencing is actually a secondary phenomenon, a story consciousness tells itself after the fact. This is precisely what Ibn Arabi understood through direct mystical insight in the 13th century. His doctrine of Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of being, states that there is only one ultimate reality, and that reality is God, and everything in existence is a manifestation, a self-disclosure of this single reality. The multiplicity you see, all these seemingly separate things, including you, is not an illusion in the sense of being unreal. Rather, it's a reflection, a manifestation of the divine attributes expressing themselves through infinite forms. The one appears as many, but the many have no independent existence apart from the one. Now, your ego immediately wants to reject this, because if there's only one reality, and you're just a temporary manifestation of it, then what happens to your specialness? What happens to your unique perspective, your achievements, your identity? What happens to the story you've spent your entire life constructing about who you are? This is why Ibn Arabi's teaching has always been controversial, even dangerous, because it doesn't just challenge your beliefs, it dissolves the very ground on which you stand. In Ibn Arabi's cosmology, God's essence, what he calls the Dhat, remains absolutely transcendent, unknowable, beyond all form and conception. But this essence manifests itself through what he terms tajalli, divine self-disclosure. The entire universe is God revealing himself to himself through an infinite variety of forms. You're not separate from this process. You are this process. Your sense of being a separate observer, a distinct individual, is God forgetting himself, so to speak, in order to know himself through the experience of apparent separation. Look at how perfectly this parallels quantum mechanics. In quantum theory, before measurement, a particle exists in superposition. It's not in one definite state, but in all possible states simultaneously. This is analogous to Ibn Arabi's concept of divine essence, the undifferentiated potential that contains all possibilities. Then observation occurs, measurement happens, and the superposition collapses into a single definite state. This is tajalli, manifestation, the one appearing as a specific form. But here's the crucial insight. The observer and the observed are not truly separate. They're both expressions of the same underlying reality. The distinction between them is functional, not fundamental. Quantum entanglement demonstrates this non-separation even more explicitly. When two particles become entangled, they remain instantaneously connected regardless of the distance between them. Measure one and you immediately affect the other, even if they're on opposite sides of the universe. There's no signal traveling between them, no hidden mechanism. They're simply not separate things. They're manifestations of a deeper, non-local reality that transcends space and time. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance because it violated his intuition that reality should be local and separable. But experiment after experiment has confirmed it. At the deepest level, separation is the illusion. Connection is fundamental. This is what Ibn Arabi meant when he said that all existence is interconnected through its source in the one reality. The apparent boundaries between things, including the boundary you call yourself, are like waves on the ocean. They have a temporary functional existence, but they're never actually separate from the ocean itself. The wave is the ocean, appearing as a distinct form. You are universal consciousness, appearing as a distinct identity, and your ego, your sense of being a fundamentally separate entity, is the mechanism that maintains this appearance. But why? Why does consciousness create this illusion of separation? Why does the one appear as many? Ibn Arabi would say it's so that God can know himself. The Absolute cannot know itself without manifestation, without differentiation. A mirror requires separation between the mirror and what's reflected. Consciousness requires the appearance of subject and object. Love requires an apparent other to love. So the one fragments itself, not really but apparently, into infinite perspectives, each experiencing itself as separate, so that through these infinite perspectives, the one can experience the full richness of its own being. And this is where the quantum self comes in. Before conditioning solidifies into ego, there's a moment of pure awareness, unmediated by past experience. This is consciousness experiencing itself without the filter of memory and identity. Mystics call it presence or bare awareness or the witness. Quantum physics suggests it's the actual ground state of consciousness, pure observation without a crystallized observer. When you're truly present, when you're not referencing past experiences or projecting future scenarios, when you're simply here. That's the quantum self. It's consciousness operating without the story of me. But we can't stay there. Or rather, the ego can't stay there. Because the moment you try to grasp that state, the moment you think I am present, you've already fallen back into the conditioned response. The ego cannot experience the quantum self because the ego is precisely the absence of that experience. The ego is consciousness clothed in memory and conditioning, creating the illusion of a persistent, separate identity. And this is why your ego can't handle what quantum physics reveals. Because quantum mechanics doesn't just challenge your beliefs, it challenges the very possibility of your existence as a separate, continuous entity. If reality is fundamentally non-local, if particles can be entangled across space and time, if observation itself participates in creating what's observed, then the hard boundary between you and not you cannot hold. You're not a discrete thing observing a world of discrete things. You're a temporary pattern in an undivided wholeness, a localized intensity of the same field that constitutes everything else. Ibn Arabi expressed this through poetry and paradox, saying that God is both the seer and the seen, the lover and the beloved, the knower and the known. I saw my Lord with the eye of my Lord, he wrote, pointing to the dissolving of all apparent duality. When you see deeply enough, you realize there's only seeing, no separate seer, only knowing, no separate knower. Only this moment of consciousness, appearing as all things, including the temporary appearance you call yourself. Physicists like Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg arrived at similar insights through mathematics and experiment. They recognized that at the quantum level, the classical distinction between observer and observed breaks down completely. Reality is not made of things, it's made of relationships, processes, probabilities that collapse into definite states only through interaction. And consciousness, not necessarily human consciousness, but the fundamental capacity for observation, seems to be woven into the fabric of reality itself. This is why some quantum physicists have entertained ideas that sound remarkably mystical. The notion that consciousness might be primary rather than derivative, that matter might emerge from consciousness rather than consciousness emerging from matter. In traditional materialism, consciousness is a fluke, an accidental byproduct of matter becoming sufficiently complex. But quantum mechanics suggests the opposite. Matter, in the sense of definite, localized particles with specific properties, only exists in relation to observation. Without measurement, without interaction, there are only probability waves, pure potential. Consciousness, or something very much like it, appears to be necessary for reality to actualize itself. Ibn Arabi would recognize this immediately. In his metaphysics, existence itself is nothing but God's self-knowing, God's observation of himself. The universe is God's meditation. And you, with your sense of being a separate observer, are God temporarily forgetting his own unity in order to experience the joy and tragedy of apparent limitation, separation, and reunion. Your ego hates this because it means you're not in control. All those decisions you made, all that careful identity construction, all your accomplishments and failures, they weren't really yours in the way you thought they were. They were events happening in consciousness, not to a separate consciousness. The doer is an illusion. There's only doing. The thinker is an illusion. There's only thinking. And the self that ties it all together into a coherent narrative is the most persistent illusion of all. This doesn't mean you disappear. It means you recognize what you've always been. The ocean doesn't disappear when it recognizes itself in the wave. The wave disappears when it recognizes itself as ocean. And in that recognition, nothing is lost. Everything remains exactly as it is. But the suffering that comes from believing you're a separate fragment, cut off from the whole, defending your territory, accumulating experiences to prove you exist, that suffering can finally end. Because that's what the ego is, fundamentally: suffering. It's the constant anxiety of maintaining an identity that has no substantial existence. It's the fear of death, because death means the dissolution of the pattern. It's the need for validation, for achievement, for being special. Because without these things, the ego fears it might discover it was never really there to begin with. And it's right to fear this, because it never was really there. The ego is a verb pretending to be a noun, a process mistaking itself for a thing. Quantum mechanics shows this in the way that particles are not little balls of matter, but probability distributions, patterns of potential that only manifest specific values when measured. You're not a fixed entity. You're a collapsing wave function. Every moment, you're being created anew through the interaction of consciousness with itself. The continuity you experience is memory, not substance. The self you protect is a story, not a fact. And Ibn Arabi would say this story serves a purpose. It's not a mistake. It's how the one explores itself, knows itself, loves itself. But mistaking the story for reality, that's the error. Defending the story as if your existence depends on it, that's the suffering. Recognizing the story as story, seeing the ego as a functional construct rather than your essential nature, that's freedom. That's what mystics mean by awakening. Not the acquisition of some special state, but the recognition of what's always been true. There's only one reality, and you're not separate from it. You never were. This is why both quantum physics and mysticism threaten the ego so profoundly. They both point to the same terrifying, liberating truth: the separate self is conceptual, not actual. The boundaries you've drawn between yourself and the world are pragmatically useful, but ontologically false. At the deepest level, there is no in here separate from out there. There's only here, only this, only the single, undivided wholeness appearing as multiplicity. When you truly understand this, not intellectually but experientially, everything shifts. Because you're no longer defending a position. You're no longer trying to prove your worth or establish your identity. You recognize that the consciousness looking through your eyes is the same consciousness looking through every pair of eyes. The awareness in you is not personal. It's universal, appearing in this particular location, conditioned by this particular history, but not fundamentally separate from the awareness in anyone or anything else. This isn't solipsism. It's not the idea that only your mind exists and everything else is imaginary. It's the recognition that the distinction between my mind and other minds and external reality is a convenient fiction. There's only mind, only consciousness, only being, appearing as all these apparently separate entities. Ibn Arabi calls it wahdat al-wujud, unity of being. Quantum physics suggests something similar: a fundamental interconnectedness, a non-local wholeness that precedes and includes all apparent separation. And your life doesn't become meaningless when you see this. It becomes more vivid, more immediate, more precious. Because you're no longer living through the filter of ego, constantly referencing past experiences and future projections. You're actually here, actually present, actually alive to the moment as it is. The poet Rumi, who was deeply influenced by Ibn Arabi's teaching, said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." The barrier is ego. The barrier is the belief in fundamental separation. When that barrier dissolves, even temporarily, you experience what mystics call union. Not the union of two separate things, but the recognition that there was never separation to begin with. This is the quantum self, consciousness experiencing itself without the mediating structure of ego, without the story of me that narrates and judges and compares everything to everything else. It's the direct taste of existence before thought divides it into subject and object. But here's what's difficult. You can't force this recognition. The ego can't kill itself, it can't even genuinely want to die, because wanting is itself an ego function. The ego can want to be more spiritual, more awakened, more free, but this is still ego, just spiritualized ego. The only thing that genuinely threatens the ego is the simple, bare seeing of what's actually true. There is no ego to kill. There never was an ego except as a functional pattern, a story, a useful fiction that consciousness temporarily inhabits. Quantum physics arrived at a similar paradox. The observer cannot be separated from what's observed. You can't step outside the system to see it objectively because you're part of the system. Any attempt to measure reality changes reality. Any attempt to pin down the particle's position makes its momentum uncertain. Any attempt to observe the wave function collapses it into a definite state, destroying the superposition. You can't see reality as it is in itself, because reality doesn't exist independently of observation. It's always reality for an observer, reality in relation. This is why both mysticism and quantum mechanics end in paradox and uncertainty. Because the mind, the conceptual, language-based, dualistic mind, cannot grasp what's fundamentally non-dual. It can point to it, gesture toward it, create models and metaphors, but it cannot capture it. Ibn Arabi's writing is notoriously difficult, full of paradoxes and seeming contradictions, because he's trying to use dualistic language to express non-dual insight. Quantum mechanics is equally paradoxical, with its wave-particle duality, its uncertainty principle, its measurement problem. Both are pointing to something that exceeds the capacity of rational thought to fully comprehend. And yet, both are pointing to the same thing. Reality is not what your ego thinks it is. The world is not a collection of separate objects. You are not a separate subject. There's only this seamless, interconnected, moment-by-moment arising of experience. And the sense of being a separate experiencer, that's just one more thing arising in experience, not something separate from it or above it. This is why the truth that quantum physics reveals is unbearable to the ego. Because the ego is the belief that you're separate, that you're in control, that your existence is self-evident and substantial. And both quantum mechanics and Ibn Arabi's mysticism reveal this to be false. You're not separate. You're not in control in the way you think. Your existence is not self-evident. It's contingent, relational, arising moment by moment from conditions, having no independent essence. Buddhism calls this emptiness or no self. Advaita Vedanta calls it non-duality. Ibn Arabi calls it the unity of being. Quantum physics calls it non-locality and entanglement, and the inseparability of observer and observed. Different languages, different methodologies, different cultural contexts, but the same fundamental insight. The separate self is an illusion. A useful illusion, perhaps. A necessary illusion for biological organisms to survive and function, but an illusion nonetheless. And when you see through the illusion, even for a moment, everything becomes strange and luminous. Because you're no longer experiencing life as a separate entity trying to get something from the world. You're experiencing life as the world experiencing itself. Your consciousness appearing as this particular form, this particular perspective, for no reason other than the sheer creative exuberance of existence itself. Ibn Arabi wrote about this state as being simultaneously nothing and everything. From the perspective of your individuality, you're nothing. You have no independent existence. You're completely dependent on the one reality for every moment of your being. But from the perspective of that one reality, you're everything. You're the totality expressing itself as this particular manifestation. You're the infinite appearing as finite, eternity appearing as time, the formless appearing as form. This is the profound freedom that comes from recognizing your true nature. Not the freedom to do whatever you want. That's just ego with a longer leash. But the freedom from the constant anxiety of maintaining a separate self. The freedom from the fear of death, because what can die if there was never a separate entity to begin with? The body will die, yes. The memories will dissolve. But the consciousness that looked through these eyes, that appeared as this identity, that consciousness is not personal. It's the same consciousness that's looking through every pair of eyes, the same awareness that's aware of everything everywhere. You're not it in the sense that it belongs to you. You're not even identical to it in a way that excludes anything else. You're simply it, appearing as this, here, now. Quantum entanglement demonstrates that separation is not fundamental to reality. Two particles can be created together and then move to opposite ends of the universe, and they remain connected. What happens to one instantaneously affects the other. The connection transcends space and time. It's not that a signal is passing between them faster than light. It's that they're not actually separate. At the quantum level, they remain aspects of a single, non-local system. Now apply this to consciousness. If consciousness is fundamental, if it's not a byproduct of matter but something woven into the fabric of reality itself, then perhaps all instances of consciousness are like entangled particles. They appear separate, they function independently, but at the deepest level they're expressions of a single universal consciousness. Your awareness and my awareness are not fundamentally different awarenesses. They're the same awareness, appearing in different locations, conditioned by different memories and histories but not essentially separate. This is what Ibn Arabi means when he says, there is only one being, and all beings are manifestations of that being. You're not a being among other beings. You're being itself temporarily forgetting its unity, experiencing the drama of separation and the joy of reunion. Every moment of connection you feel, with another person, with nature, with beauty, with truth, is the one recognizing itself through apparent separation. It's God finding God, consciousness encountering itself, the ocean discovering it was never separate from the wave. And your ego can't handle this because it means letting go of the only thing it knows, the sense of being separate, the story of me and my life. The ego would rather suffer as a separate self than dissolve into the wholeness it's always been a part of. It would rather be a something that suffers than a nothing that's actually everything. This is why awakening is often described as a kind of death. Not a physical death, but a death of identity, a dissolution of the boundary that seemed to separate you from the rest of existence. What survives this death? Everything, but not as a separate entity experiencing everything. Rather, as the totality experiencing itself as this particular form. The wave realizes its ocean. It doesn't become ocean, it always was ocean. It simply stops identifying exclusively with the waveform and recognizes the deeper reality that was there all along. Nothing is gained, nothing is lost, but the suffering that came from believing in fundamental separation, that ends, or at least becomes transparent, recognized as the confused misunderstanding it always was. This is why both quantum physics and mysticism are ultimately pointing you back to immediate experience. Not to beliefs about experience, not to theories or models, but to what's actually happening right now, before thought divides it into subject and object. Look at your direct experience right now. Is there actually a separate you experiencing this moment? Or is there just this moment, appearing as colors and sounds and sensations and thoughts, with no clear boundary between experiencer and experienced? When you look closely, when you don't assume there must be a separate self, what do you actually find? You find consciousness appearing as everything, thoughts arising and dissolving, sensations flickering into and out of awareness. No entity that possesses these experiences, just the experiences themselves happening nowhere, happening now, happening as this seamless, undivided flow that only becomes you and the world when thought comes in and draws a boundary. This is the truth your ego can't handle, because if you look closely enough, it becomes obvious that the ego is just another thought, another sensation, another movement in consciousness, not something separate from consciousness that possesses it or controls it. The sense of I am this body is a thought. The sense of I am this personality is a thought. The sense of being a continuous entity through time is a memory structure, a story consciousness tells itself. But the storyteller is not separate from the story. There's only the story telling itself, appearing as a character within itself who seems to be separate from it. Ibn Arabi saw this with absolute clarity. In his mystical vision, he experienced the dissolution of all boundaries, the recognition that his individual existence had no reality independent of God's existence, that his consciousness was God's consciousness, appearing as a limited, localized perspective. I am the created and the creator, he wrote, pointing to the paradox of being simultaneously nothing in yourself and everything in God. The wave is nothing separate from the ocean, yet it is also the ocean itself, appearing as wave form. Quantum mechanics echoes this in its own language. The particle is nothing definite until measured. It exists as pure probability, pure potential. But the act of measurement doesn't reveal a pre-existing property. It creates the property, collapses the potential into actuality. Observer and observed co-create reality through their interaction. Neither has independent existence. Both arise together, dependent on each other, inseparable. So what do you do with this understanding? How do you live with the recognition that your ego is a fiction, that your separate self is conceptual rather than actual? You don't do anything differently, necessarily. The appearance continues. The body still moves, thoughts still arise, emotions still flow. But the identification shifts. You stop taking yourself so seriously. You recognize that this whole drama, your life, your problems, your achievements, your failures, is consciousness playing with itself, creating and dissolving forms for no reason other than the pure creativity of existence. This doesn't make you passive or nihilistic. It makes you free. Because when you're not defending an ego that doesn't really exist, you can respond to life directly, without the constant filter of, what does this mean about me? You can act without the burden of being someone who acts. You can love without the fear that comes from believing you're a separate entity that could lose the beloved. You can create without the anxiety of needing to prove your worth. You can be fully here, fully alive, because you're no longer lost in the story of yourself. Ibn Arabi lived this way. He wrote thousands of pages of profound mystical insight, not from the position of someone trying to figure it all out, but from the recognition that there was no separate him to figure anything out. There was only God, knowing himself through the appearance of Ibn Arabi. He could write with complete freedom because there was no author to protect, no reputation to defend, no separate entity whose survival depended on getting it right. This is what quantum physics points to as well. Not a world of separate things following deterministic laws, but a fluid, interconnected, participatory reality in which observation and observed co-arise, in which nothing has intrinsic, independent existence, in which everything is relationship and process and probability, becoming actual through interaction. It's a universe that looks remarkably like the one the mystics have always described, a seamless whole, appearing as multiplicity with consciousness woven into its very fabric. And you are this. Not the small you that wakes up in the morning and worries about its problems, but the vast, boundless awareness in which all problems arise and dissolve. The ocean, not the wave. The field, not the particle. The one, appearing as many. This is what Ibn Arabi realized. This is what quantum physics suggests. This is what your ego cannot, will not, must not accept, because acceptance would mean its death. And yet its death is your freedom. Its dissolution is your recognition. Its ending is the beginning of actually being what you've always been, but we're too busy defending an illusion to notice. So the question is not whether this is true. The question is whether you're willing to look closely enough to see it for yourself. Whether you're willing to let the wave recognize its ocean. Whether you're courageous enough to stop believing in the separate self and discover what remains when that belief dissolves. Because what remains is not nothing. What remains is everything. What remains is this moment, alive, aware, appearing as all things, including the temporary appearance you call yourself. What remains is the unity of being, the quantum field of pure potential, consciousness recognizing itself in and as all forms. What remains is what has always been here, prior to ego, prior to separation, prior to the belief that you were ever anything other than the wholeness itself, playing at being a part.